What I really do is I take people through a curated mindset course that helps people get into alignment with an identity that they can hook into, kind of bite into, an identity which is an actual version of themselves. So it's not someone else. It's not someone famous. It's not their mom. It's not their dad. It's a version of them that they can then see. Okay. Then they can start to feel. And then I help this client make decisions based on how that version of themselves would make decisions. And then it becomes about determining how to then align different lifestyle factors, different decisions, whether that's actually partly in business, because a lot of my clients are entrepreneurs.
Hi, Josh. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Mark. It's good to see you.
Good to see you. You are not an average trainer. As opposed to anybody else, you actually focus on balancing mind, body, and emotions when you're training your clients. Tell me a little bit reason about why you go at it this way.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. And it's a big differentiator. I think it started because when I started as a coach and trainer about 13, 14 years ago, I was focused on the kind of more cliche, generic approach of just counting reps, counting sets, and doing the fitness side of it. I realized that there were other aspects of us all, but specifically my clients, that I wasn't able to access by taking that linear approach. So I began to take additional courses that were a little bit outside of just fitness and movement. Mindset courses, I hired different coaches myself. And what I found was that there was a much more holistic, maybe that word's overused, but I'll use well-rounded or holistic approach to engaging and serving a client that became much more fulfilling for me as a coach and also much more helpful for the clients. And I think that dualism allowed me to then open up and begin to then niche with the clients that really wanted help in those additional areas. And I've seen these clients just skyrocket.
What does that mean when you say holistic rounded approach? What does that
Yeah.
entail?
So the well-rounded approach basically means that at the core of this, I'm still a fitness coach. Okay. I like the word coach. Trainer assumes that we're talking about reps, exercise. You're going to get a program. You might talk about food and nutrition. So first off, I like to use the word coach because coach opens up the arena to more possibilities. And what I really do is I take people through a curated mindset course that helps people get into alignment with an identity that they can hook into, kind of bite into, an identity which is an actual version of themselves. So it's not someone else. It's not someone famous. It's not their mom. It's not their dad. It's a version of them that they can then see. Okay. Then they can start to feel. And then I help this client make decisions based on how that version of themselves would make decisions. And then it becomes about determining how to then align different lifestyle factors, different decisions, whether that's actually partly in business, because a lot of my clients are entrepreneurs. And the emotional side of it is really, well, it's not necessarily segregated into emotional, but I need to show that I'm vulnerable and that I can be expressive. And I find that leading by example is the best way to really build that emotional awareness for the client and then set the tone for having that type of relationship with the client, which becomes quite a bit deeper than, again, what my approach was and what my relationship was like with my clients when I was a trainer. Now that I'm a coach, it's much more in depth because I have some of the deepest relationships I've had with some of my clients because we have that emotional kind of reciprocity in some ways.
Tell me a little bit more about alignment with this identity. Can you give an
Mhm.
example of a client that who came to you a certain way and then because of the process they ended up realizing and feeling differently about themselves?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I won't mention this client's name because this is really personal work, but I will talk about their identity because that'll be synonymous, or pardon me, yeah, people won't know what that means. I had this client come in. I worked with them a couple of years ago and I worked with them basically just on training and nutrition. I saw some good results. They did. We improved their aerobic fitness. So they were able to run a little longer, run faster, overall develop some good strength. And they were a young man. So they were I think he was 18 at the time. So pretty young to actually hire a coach and to start taking leadership, which I thought was amazing. So fast forward a couple of years, this same client came to me, and he had some goals around just becoming a better version of himself. It was fairly generic. It was fairly There wasn't a lot of clarity in it. So we went through some of these exercises, and this client has now grown into a version of himself that he believes he is going to be master of the universe. And I know it sounds funny, or it may sound funny. It also may sound inspiring as fuck. So this is the guy that now believes that he can accomplish literally anything he sets his mind to, even if it hasn't been accomplished in the past. He wants to be the strongest and most capable physically that he possibly can be, which puts him at the 1 percentile, or the 99th percentile, pardon me. He also wants to grow his business, which was making 30K last year. He's already making 70K doing his own business. And he wants to live a life of purpose. So now he's put himself in a position. And again, he's a young man. I wasn't anywhere close to this when I was 20, 21. I was drinking beer on the weekend, getting some workouts in the week, chasing girls. Like, I was not anywhere close to where this guy was. So now this guy is a part of a group that I have where he's fully vulnerable about all the goals he has. He completely owns the fucking ambitious goals he has in health, in mindset or wealth, and in purpose. He wants to grow a business that employs as many men as possible so that he can then lead by example and have other men have another role model, another positive role model to have in their life. Because I think a lot of men are missing that. And that's a really good example of one of my clients that checks off all 3 boxes, has so much fucking belief in himself. That's no longer the limiting factor. It's just now coaching him on how to keep going with those things.
What is it about this process that you think brings about a conviction in your clients that simply isn't attainable by reps and sets?
That's a really good question, Mark. I don't know the simple answer to that, but I know where it stems from. You said the word conviction. I think that's a really good word to use. I think how I would summarize this best is it's putting the time into getting clear on a version of yourself that you think you would love to express more often, and then working on the belief systems that you can become that person, that you are that person. And then it's about creating opportunities where you can prove to yourself that you are or you aren't that person. But hopefully we're working on checking off the, yes, you are that person. Here are the examples.
Josh, the unique thing about you, I speak to so many coaches, trainers, in the fitness realm. I train myself. I have never heard a coach approach it this way. More than one time, you're bringing up the importance of vulnerability, the importance of expression. Tell me a little bit about your own journey. What brought you to the point where you have realized how important self-expression is in this journey?
Yeah. Oh, I love that. You know what? I grew up as a white man in a small town, and I think in a lot of ways I was pretty stunted, but I also think that I was quite average. Okay. I was average in my physique and my physical capability. I was average in what I was doing for work. I was average in my mindset. I was below average in relationships. I was a dick, man, when I was younger. I just didn't have a lot of great role models. As I got into my early 20s, I started to realize that I was very average in all of these columns. And what I realized, Mark, is that when you're average, you're actually moving backwards. It's like inflation. If you don't keep up with inflation, you're actually going backwards. You're actually underwater. And I realized that I had to make a decision for myself and get fired up to say, you know what, if I'm going to do something about my life, it has to be me. No one is going to pull me out of there, because I'm not visibly sinking. I'm just in some ways, I was one of the most dangerous people because I was average and I was just floating under the radar. I wasn't screaming out for help. I was just blending in with the crowd. And I think the real difficult thing that I realized was that I was very uncomfortable feeling like I was underperforming in these areas. And that has really led me to pushing myself in the physical realm, which we'll talk about, pushing myself in the emotional realm because I was not very self-aware. I was really selfish in relationships. I could not see myself being a father at that time. And I was emotionally very unattached, had lots of attachment style issues or lots of attachment issues. And I realized I had to take ownership over those things. So that led me to fast forward 10, 15 years. I've been a part of a men's group for 3 years. I've seen 6 different therapists. I've had so many different coaches, Mark, physiotherapists, I call coaches, chiropractors, athletic therapists, running coaches, strength coaches. I have a coach right now. I'm still in the men's group. And I realized that once I realized that I needed to change those things for myself, I realized that, wow, I'm actually making some major leeway here. Like I'm now a lot different than I used to be. It's very evident. And if I know what this feels like, I can help other people. because I know what it's like to feel insignificant, and I know what it's like to feel unstoppable. And as much and as often as I can, I choose the latter. I choose to feel what it would feel like to feel unstoppable, because it's a fucking incredible feeling. It's not easy to be in that state, but it's incredibly empowering feeling. And I know I'm doing that for me so that I can then be better for people around me.
Let me ask you this question. You talked about feeling insignificant. You talked about feeling like you were average or sometimes below average in some areas. In all honesty, when you're looking back at your life, was it because a lack of attention that others had on you? Like when you look back at it, if there was a mentor, if there was a figure there that would have pointed you out or pushed you, would you have been a better version of yourself back then? Or was it just how things were supposed to play out so that you could be this version of you today?
I don't know the answer, but I'd say I'm really grateful for how it's played out and for what it was. I think if men had better and or more leadership from men, things would likely be better for them as they're growing up. I think I was pretty late to the party, so to speak. Showing up as a mid-20s, like just realizing, sure, I was fit, but who gives a shit, man? Most people are fit when they're 25 when they go into a gym. But to be detached emotionally and very selfish and very blindsided in a lot of ways and not vulnerable. I didn't know what vulnerability was. I didn't know how to express myself. I didn't know how to set boundaries. I didn't know. And this is in relationships. This is in romantic relationships. This is in business relationships. This is with clients, whatever the family. I didn't know how to do that. So I had a very small toolbox with a couple tools, and I was hitting walls a lot. Yeah, I feel that's the truth. So your question about, in all honesty, why was I that way? I think a big part of it was what a lot of people would probably term middle child syndrome. I'm a middle child. And I remember being young and being really loud and outspoken and to a lot of people annoying. And I think I carried that with me, the feeling of I'm too much, I'm too much, I'm too loud, I'm taking up too much space. Yeah.
It takes a big man to be able to look back at their life and point out the things that they did not do well. Because let's face it, we have all had moments in our lives that we weren't really proud of, but some of us don't want to admit it. So the fact that you do speaks volumes about you and your character. You talked about the importance of men leading men. And this is not just you, this is happening everywhere. Almost everywhere I talk these days, for some reason, out of nowhere, there is a glaring gap in leadership in men. And you brought it out beautifully, saying if there were more men leading men, there would be a different type of camaraderie, a different type of brotherhood, a different type of leadership that would be instilled in us. Based on your experience working with men yourself, being in a men's group, what do you think is lacking in today's society inherently that all of a sudden there is this gap?
I've reflected on this a lot, and I think one of the major gaps is that men are scared. So I think it's fear in a lot of ways. And I realize I'm not going to nail every single part of why men are not living up to their potential or why there's not enough good mentorship or leaders. But I think it's fear in a lot of ways. I think vulnerability is painful. For me to say to you or to someone else, hey, man, I'm wrong, or I overreacted, or I reacted really poorly. Like that's more challenging in the moment than to say to ignore or to deflect or to fucking ghost you or whatever these other tactics are that people use these days to not take ownership. I get really fired up about this because I was such a piece of shit before, man. And I don't say that in a belittling way. I say that in a way to say I was really underdeveloped from a skill set. And I know this because I've lived this now. Taking ownership solves a lot of issues, and it also reduces how problematic the thing becomes, right? It's like an argument ender. If you just, as a man, if you just take ownership over the situation, again, relationship, romantic, client, business, whatever, I've just seen this happen a lot where it's a little harder to do. Trust me, I know it's easier to stay silent and to maybe play victim or to blame or whatever. But if you just take ownership, it solves a lot of issues and the conflict resolves like 80%. So I see taking ownership as a really good way to help then improve communication and to build trust between people, because I think men don't trust themselves in a lot of ways. And I think it's fair because we don't have very good skill set. How could you trust someone that can't take ownership and that's not very skilled at something? I think that's very accurate not to trust that person because they don't trust themselves. They're out of integrity and they won't own up to a whole lot of shit when they fuck up or etc.
Let's go back to your past. You were growing up as a middle child, you're struggling with certain things, but at some point you have the self awareness to realize that there's something missing, there's something lacking. I want to push myself. So you start devoting yourself into training and pushing the boundaries of your body. Tell us a little bit about that journey of your life. What was that like? What was pushing you on a daily basis and motivating you on a daily basis?
Yeah, I think strangely enough, I started training when I was about 18. I think in grade 9, we had a course called Body Shop, and it was just you have free reins of the weight room. We didn't have very good instruction, very minimal instruction, so I did a lot of things very poorly, but it's probably also hard to tell a guy that's 15 to do things differently or go lighter. So I realized my ego was huge at that point. But I got hooked. And part of the reason I got hooked at the gym was because I wasn't awesome at sports. I tried out for some teams, tried out for rugby. I was too scared to get hit. I tried out for basketball, didn't make it. Again, I was really average. And you have to be above average to make a lot of these teams because they're competitive. My skill set was, as I saw it, quite average. I got into the gym because I liked the feeling. It was social. It was also very individual among a building of people doing very similar things, right? As you've been training a lot for these national competitions, what the training's like, there's some good camaraderie. So that started as a young age for me. I think partly luckily and maybe a little bit accidentally. The reason I started to do harder things, experimental things, was partly because I didn't know if I could do it or not. So there was an inherent curiosity for me. I had some understanding of what I could do, spending so much time in a gym. I knew a lot of the weights I could lift. I knew I could do certain circuits. I knew I could run a little bit. But I also knew there was a lot of things I hadn't done. So this has taken 15 years back. I got inspired from two guys that were in the gym. They were carrying around 150 pound, the biggest dumbbells they had, 150 pounds per hand. They were same age as me. They were like 20 years old and they were running across the gym with 300 pounds. And I was like, holy shit, this is possible. And I remember that moment sparked me to start training for strongman competitions. So I trained for those for a couple of years. Got actually pretty good. I was a major underdog. I was 100 pounds less than a lot of the guys competing. I was like 2 pounds. A lot of the guys were like 280. I liked the underdog approach. I didn't like being the best. I didn't like being the one that people thought was going to win. I liked being the underdog because at one point I had a big chip on my shoulder and I said, if you won't notice me now, I'm going to show you with what I can do. I got into a lot of other sports when I realized, okay, I'm pretty good at this. What else am I terrible at? So I started to take stock over the things that I knew were available in terms of fitness realms. And I realized, oh shit, there's a lot of stuff I'm terrible at. I started doing yoga, started doing a lot of yoga. As much as it's not a skill to get really good at, I got better at yoga. Then I started doing CrossFit. I got pretty good at CrossFit. I started competing at CrossFit, did decent. Okay, so I brought that bar up. Then I started doing boxing, got into a little bit of Muay Thai. I was going to train till I did my first fight. But the reason I didn't do that is because I had several friends that were police officers, several friends that were fighters, and all of them were concussed. And I didn't want to get a brain injury. So I decided not to do that. Then I met a guy who was training very differently than me. We became friends and it became a game where we would basically see who could create the harder thing. So picture this, two guys in a car driving to their first ultra marathon, which is longer than 42K. If you ask real ultramarathons, they'll say longer than 100K or 100 miles. This was a 50K mountain race in New York. So on the way to New York, we hadn't even done this 50K. And here, him and I are talking about what's the craziest thing we could do next. We hadn't even done the next crazy thing. We're already planning ahead. So we get this napkin idea that we're going to run in a shipping container for 24 hours and we're going to do it in his backyard. He owned a house at the time in a suburban area. We're going to somehow get 2 large shipping containers dropped into his backyard. We're going to put treadmills in there and we're going to do a Facebook Live. Fast forward 8 months and that event is being hosted at the Spartan World Championships. We have a cause behind it where we're supporting veterans and first responders for mental health. And it's being announced nationally and globally in some ways. and we're doing this first ever sensory deprived race to support other people. So what I realized at that point was it's not really about the fitness thing. It's not really about the run. It's not really about the CrossFit. It's not really about the striking. It's not really about the strongman. It's about redefining my own boundaries, because all of us can make up what we want to do. It's all made up, right? Competition is made up. There's just specific criteria to them. I wasn't exceptional in any specific regard. So I decided to go wider with it and say, cool, what else can I try? I'm not going to be an Olympic athlete. Don't think I have any hidden talents that I haven't become aware of. I'm just going to start experimenting. And it was in these experiments where I really decided to let myself succumb to the experience and realized all this potential I didn't have, and realized I had all this problem solving ability that I didn't know I had. I had these different areas of my brain I could tap into. I actually had grit. I could take ownership. I had integrity, and I had capacity for things that I didn't know I had. So again, these were all examples of me proving the identity, right? Before I even created these exercises, I was doing it.
Your whole life, you are pushing the boundaries. You're challenging the status quo. You're seeing how far you can go, not just physically, but also mentally, because there is incredible mental strength needed in doing these things. Was there a moment in life where all of a sudden things changed because of any major event where you had to stop and pause and reconsider things?
Yeah, I probably quite a few, Mark, but I'd say one thing that stands out to me when I was when I was late 20s, I think I was around 27. I'd been training for a long time, right? Since I was 13. I had a successful personal training job at the time. I had just gotten top trainer in Canada, and I was reaching the goals I set. I had a couple houses. I was really busy. And I remember I was sitting down on the floor in my kitchen alone. And I remember I scared myself. And it was like a stark moment of introspection where I thought, holy shit, if this is the course of action I'm on, I'm going to get to age 30 and I'm not even going to remember the years of my life. I'm so forward thinking. I'm so driven forward and focused on the future of the goals I want to accomplish, of the ambitions I want, that I'm not even present to life. And I really felt that. I remember the bodily sensation. I was like, holy fuck, this is the path I'm on. What is the point of this? Setting goals and achieving them without living, without feeling what life is. And at that
Was there
moment, I
some
made a choice. Yeah, I made a choice to slow the fuck down, to be present. I can be present in the process. It's not specifically about the outcome. I have this picture by my bed. It's a mountain with a peak, and there's a line drawn on it, which represents the path we take to climb up the mountain, which looks like this. That's the process. The dot at the top is the peak, and that's the outcome or the result. 99.9% of my life is spent in the process. So if I can't be present and mindful about some of that approach, I'm living for a dot in my life. And I don't think that's a very fulfilling life to live.
Yeah. 100% truth to that, like focusing on the journey as opposed to a destination, because we need to be able to enjoy the journey. But my question that I'm most curious about is, here you are in your 20s, you're extremely successful. You've just gotten Canada's top trainer, which is not a joke award to get. You're financially successful. You're riding the high, the wave. Was there something else happening in your life that kind of made you realize, wow, I'm not really enjoying the present at all? Or was it just random and instantaneous? Did something trigger this?
I'd love for this to be a moment where I'm like, check out this fucking story. It's so relatable. This is the aha moment, but I don't truthfully think there was. This is before I had my son. I think it was in the middle of a lot of things for me. And I think it was luckily, maybe at that point, I had a realization that I was scared. And I let myself feel what that fear was. And again, I talked about fear as men, right? As men, fuck, man, I'm putting my hand up because I'm not a guy that doesn't experience fear. I experience fear. And this was a classic example. I got to take ownership of this because this is something I have control of. And I feel extremely uncomfortable about this. So I think it was a realization because I was on such an extreme track that if the median in the road is the middle point, I was like riding the ditch for a couple of years. So it's like where there's more risk, there's more reward. And I was seeing the reward, but I was also really mindful of what the risk was. And I think that lack of presence and lack of being in the fucking moment, like looking you in the eyes and being like, yeah, I remember that moment. I don't remember having those at that time. And that scared me.
So tell us about the experience of having your son. What kind of effect did that have on you?
I'm going to tell you about the reason I decided to have a kid, because this is probably the strangest part about it all. So when I was gearing up for the 24-hour run, which is called Locked and Loaded, 24 hours of isolation, I was training a lot. And I remember having a conversation with my dad before, about 3 weeks before that event took place in Nevada. And so my dad, I have four siblings, two half and two full, and I'm the middle of the middle. So I could not be more of a middle child. I remember asking him, because up until that point, I was uncertain if I wanted kids. I was really neutral about it. I remember just point blank asking him, I said, Dad, how did you know that you wanted kids? And his advice wasn't very good. He said, I just knew. And I was like, okay. And I said, Dad, how do you, and this is me looking for leadership, right? This is me wanting to have those figures that can help the younger man, the very young man I was, come up with some decisions to lead my own life. And I think his advice was really good. His advice was, I don't know how you're going to think about it, but why don't you think about it when you're in the container? And that was the shipping container. A couple of weeks later, I'm in the pitch black with no headphones, no watch, no one else in there. I don't have any audiobooks. I don't have a timer. I don't know how long it's been. I don't know how fast I'm going. It's me in the dark on a fucking moving belt. Non-powered, by the way, right? So you can't set the speed. I remember getting out of that container, and the first thing I said, my girlfriend at the time was there. And I remember saying to her, I want to have kids. Putting myself in those moments where there's saying no distraction is almost an understatement. There's no stimulus. The stimulus was me hearing my footsteps and me talking to myself. That's what the stimulus was. It was pitch black. There was no other stimulus. And I think that moment really allowed me, that time, I guess it was several moments, 24 hours, allowed me the time to make that decision. Now, having a son, I have one son and I co-parent. So I'm not with his mom anymore. I think it's been one of the most helpful situations in my life for a couple reasons. Number one, it has forced me to become more capable. It's forced my capacity. If I thought before I didn't have the bandwidth to handle someone that's screaming and crying and illogical, I'm going to be a pretty terrible father if I can't handle this at least some of the time. And I know parents listening are like, wow, I know exactly what he's talking about. So it forced my capacity. It also led me to become much less selfish than I was, because I was quite a selfish person working on all of these goals. And I'm not saying goals are not important or that they're inherently selfish or that they're good or bad. But I was very selfish and very self-focused. To then have a son who I'm parenting partly on my own, it's been a constant reminder of what it feels like to be present. And that's challenging a lot of the time. But it's also, how can I, again, it comes back to who do I want to be? Who do I want to be? Because this guy, I have a son, he sees me all of the time. He's always watching. Even when I don't think he's watching or listening, he is watching and listening, and he knows the kind of person that I'm becoming or the person that I am. So it's become, if you want to call kids a coach, my son is like a coach to me because he keeps me accountable to everything because I know that he's mindful of everything that I'm doing. So he is like the ultimate integrity.
Let's talk a minute about being in that shipping container. So many of us know exactly what we need to do in life, but we don't do it. We're in bad relationships. We know we need to get out. We just don't do it. We're in bad jobs. We know we need to get out. Just don't do it. We're overweight. We're living a very unhealthy life, not being able to sleep at night, having all these issues. Just don't do it. I don't know if it's laziness or psyche or whatever. Let's not even worry about that. The point is, not many of us have the strength to do things that need to be done. You, on the other hand, are pushing yourself to do something so difficult and so ridiculous, it doesn't even need to be done. Where do you find that mental strength to continue when you could just say, I don't want to do it anymore?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things that come up. And I think it partly depends on the thing that I've done in my life. But I know that when I can incorporate a level of fun into it, or when I can see the fun in it, that's really helpful. If I saw everything as work or as everything as hard, then it's going to be hard. I don't picture all this stuff as hard. I picture it as, here I am. Things could be a lot fucking harder. Part of the reason I'm drawn to doing these hard things, which will help shape this, is because I think overall we're quite privileged. A lot of us are privileged. At least I'll say that I'm quite privileged. I'm not in any immediate danger. In my whole life, I probably won't experience a lot of adversity. And I think that poses a challenge for a lot of people, specifically men, because adversity, as we've highlighted or hinted at, adversity is where we discover ourselves in a lot of ways. So I believe that when we experience adversity, whether forced or created, then it gives us a moment to grab the chisel and to chip away at ourselves a little bit. Because I don't think I would know who the fuck I was if I didn't do any of this hard stuff. I think looking from someone else's perspective, they'd probably see a pretty normal average guy, doesn't take a lot of ownership, doesn't pretty average. But I don't think I would have saw that. So I think the part of the reason I'm doing this is because part of the reason I do these things is because I do find that they're fun. There's elements of fun. There's elements of unknown, experimental, and there is an inherent, I've assumed a leadership role in my life. So part of this identity work that I created, I decided to basically decided that I was a courageous person. Okay. One of the exercises I do with some of my clients is we choose a trait, a personality trait, and it's called a lineage exercise, where I take clients through, they uncover one of their father, their mother, their aunt, their uncle, someone in their lineage that's older, and they highlight a specific skill that they seem as really valuable. And we talk about really just believing that actually can be a genetic trait. Whether you believe it or not, if you choose to believe it, you're going to have some strength in there, because it's not too far-fetched to think that we can choose what personality traits we have from people that are blood related to us. We look like them, we sound like them, we act like them, we move like them. It's not strange to think that I could cherry pick a trait. And I cherry picked a trait, and it was courage. And I remember just deciding, I was like, okay, so I'm courageous. So then what do I do if I'm courageous? And a lot of those actions or decisions means that I have to lead by example so that other men can see what courageous looks like. And that means being vulnerable, being expressive, doing a hard thing, not fucking complaining about the weather. Like, those are all examples of what I believe it means to be courageous. And I saw that lacking in my life. So I decided to be that person. And I have to choose that every day, of course. But I see it as I've assumed a leadership role. So doing hard shit is just part of it. So I can prove to myself that I am courageous. Again, it goes back to the proof thing. I can't just ride out my life sitting behind a desk. That's out of integrity for me.
That's the performer and peak performer. A leader has to be a peak performer first. And that means leading your life by example. And the life that you're leading, the group that you're leading, you are not only living your life a certain way, but also performing your way through life by doing the difficult things that nobody wants to do.
Yeah.
Right? So where does this all going to take you? What's the vision for you? You have this incredible coaching experience. You have the mental strength and resilience to be able to push yourself to a point that most people can't. You are realizing the importance of emotional well-being and being connected with one's true self, connecting with others, raising a community together. You want to be in a couple of years? What's the vision?
Yeah. Thank you for asking that. The vision for me is allowing the time and space and energy to help more people uncover their potential. I think a lot of people believe what you said and that they can't do certain things. But the beauty about certain coaches, and I know there's other coaches like me, they believe in clients more than the client believes in themselves sometimes. And I think that's an inherent great quality that people hire in coaches. I believe in my clients so much that I'm willing to help them create a version of themselves that they didn't think was possible, and then help support them along the way to then get to these goals where they can be incredible leaders by leading by example. And where I see this trending is that I have helped many more clients one-on-one, that I have more men in my up-only group that want to go full fucking throttle on their health, their mindset, and their purpose, because I do believe we can work on all three of those things simultaneously. And I do think that the younger you are, the better. If you can be in your early 20s and really commit to that, you are going to live likely a long and prosperous life and a very fulfilling life versus waiting for until you're 30 like I did. And I see myself continuously looking for areas of opportunities for skill development myself, which is why I've started to study functional blood chemistry. And I'm now hiring other coaches, in the process of hiring another coach to help more people with their health, with their difficult health issues through functional chemistry and blood testing and stool testing and nutrition and those specific lifestyle protocols.
Josh, in a world where we all know what we need to do, but we simply don't find the strength to do it, you are leading by example. You're a person who is open about the mistakes they have made in the past. you accept yourself as who you are in the present, and you're willing to work on yourself for the future, not only just for your own sake, but for the community that you're leading for your son. There is something to be said about people who go and do things that doesn't need to be done. It would have been much easier for you to just take care of yourself, take care of your son, make money, build a good business, and be done with it. But you have taken on this additional optional task of being in this men's group and raising this community of men. So hats off to you for your dedication, for the motivation that you have and the dreams that you have, not only for yourself, but also the world that you want to live in and for you world you want your son to grow in. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Yeah. Thanks, Mark.